Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode 922. This is the weekly show all about weather, the pre-show. This is for the 18th of September, 2023. And for those that don't know, this is the magical part of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say outrageous things. Okay, fall is in the air for a lot of us, and look to have a good show here tonight. And let's see, we've already got some folks waiting here. I see John is about to join us. And for those looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 8 minutes, and that's where you'll get the good stuff, the show that's done. The show that's sent to the audio podcast. This pre-show is only available to those that dare watch this on YouTube. And John, can you hear us okay? And I think you're muted. You might give me an audio check just to be sure we're good here.
I had to allow it. And so can you hear me now?
Yes. So you are in Atlanta, is that true?
I am, yeah. Well, Peachtree City. So yeah, just outside of Atlanta.
All right. FFC. I like it.
Or ALR, depending on your preference. Yeah.
Well, that's true. Where'd you grow up?
I was an Air Force brat, so all over the place.
Yeah, my wife was an Army brat, so it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yep. My folks are in Colorado. It's where they ended up. But
yeah, my father-in-law was an Army colonel, and they lived all over creation, and he wound up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, as the professor of military science at the University of Alabama. So that's how they wound up here, and met my wife there. I had to ask this guy if I could marry his daughter. One of the scariest moments of my life. I mean, this was your classic Army colonel. I mean, you look at this guy and you would just melt down, you know. But he turned out to be one of my best friends and the father that I never had. My father abandoned me and my mom when I was very young. So I look back on it, and I was very grateful to have the colonel in my life for all those years. Very wise. And
when did you meet him? How old were you?
Yeah, I started dating his daughter and went over to meet him for dinner one evening, and I was scared to death. But no, we got along just great. He served in Korea, World War II, Vietnam.
Wow.
He talked with President John F. Kennedy every day from the Berlin Wall, which is really cool, for 2 weeks during all that. And he, needless to say, had a lot of stories to tell. Some of those he could not tell. Otherwise, he would break our legs. So you know how that goes.
That was my dad's line, yeah.
Yeah. All right, here comes Tony. Well, and by the way, just so you'll know, we like to tell everybody that's on here, we are streaming live now on YouTube. We will join the local television stations in my market at 8 Eastern. And about 3 out of 4 people listen to this. It's a core audio show.
Yeah.
But about 25% watch on YouTube, whether live or later. And then you've got, and again, I'm in Birmingham, so it airs on our local channels here at 8 Eastern. So we always like to tell everybody to be warned that we're live. Dr. Rice, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, man. Loud and clear.
That's the way I like it.
So did you go to the NWA this year in Kansas City?
I did not. I try to make it to the barbecue-centric NWAs, but did not this year.
Yeah, they should have had a barbecue heaven out there. I mean, that's...
I would think so.
You would, but we've been short-staffed here. I've had... whoa, what is that? That could be the worst racket I've ever heard in my life.
Challenge
Was that
accepted.
Bill? Was that Bill Murray?
Sounds like he won something.
Yeah, that's ring that bell. No, this was my first weekend off since June. We have been severely short-staffed here, so I was not in a position to get away, and I could not attend this year, which I hated because I love going to the NWA.
I understand we got one coming up in Myrtle Myrtle
Yeah.
Beach.
Yeah.
The
Ed
Redneck Riviera.
Ed Piotrowski's home market there, not too far from you.
And yep, I'll be down there. And Greg Fischel lives down there now.
Ooh, WRAL. He's been gone for how many years now? 2?
Seems like it's more than that.
Gosh, it just...
He was down in Florida for a little while, and then he moved up to Myrtle.
Okay, I don't know. He was in Florida. Well, good. Bill Murray, can you hear us at all, or is there no hope here?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you had a screeching noise when you came on here. It was pretty wild.
I don't. I was looking at a loose plug-in here, so it just probably was that.
Loose plug-in would be a good show title if we were actually
said it too early. Hey, John.
So,
hey, Tony.
Good evening.
How are y'all tonight?
Wow.
After 15 years here, I finally thought I had gotten over the whole time zone trick between Georgia and Alabama. But it got me. I was in here an hour ago. Read your email. 7 Central.
I stay cognizant of that. I typically say Eastern time whenever I mention this show. I don't. I know most people don't live in a central time zone world.
You're a network.
I just live on UTC, and it solves it all for me.
Zulu.
Sir.
It helps when we have international guests, for sure.
Man, I used to listen to WWV. I'm probably the only guy on this show that's ever listened to WWV. At 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 megahertz. Nobody listens to shortwave radio anymore.
Atomic clock.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's a clock thing. It just constantly runs the clock, so you can always tell what time it is.
Still is running.
Yeah, I think they're still on the air. WWV, Fort Collins, Colorado.
There's another one out in Hawaii.
I think that one's WWVH. But yeah, those were the glory days. Goodness, I would listen to, of course, I had a ham license. And so I'd hang out on, 80, 40, 20, 15, 10 meters. But I love to veer into the broadcast bands, the shortwave broadcast frequencies. And I guess in the internet world, it's not as sexy as it used to be, but I still think it's pretty cool. One of these days when that EMP hits, these old tube radios, we're going to save the world.
Might be tomorrow, James.
My old 6146 finals in that Heathkit hot water W101, HW101.
Check tonight's coronal mass ejection is not going to be quite strong enough to pull that off.
Okay, not tonight. Not tonight. I'm not in the mood for it tonight.
So pay your bills.
All right. I see Rick and I see Jen. And I think, and welcome to our television viewers watching on the TV side. Trust me, we have no weather issues tonight. Occasionally I get a little note. Hey, I was watching the radar and you cut it off for that program where y'all talk.
That crappy program.
Yeah. So we have absolutely no weather issues where we are tonight, a dry continental air mass. So let's get this sucker rolling here. We're going to record track number 1, and we're going to record track number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains episode number 922. This is the weekly show that's all about weather. We might be not the best podcast, but by golly, we're the longest running weather podcast in the universe since January of 2006. 922 episodes, and we are on the air for the 18th of September, 2023. Let's go out to our Oklahoma correspondents because that's where the National Weather Center is located, the worldwide weather headquarters. Rick Smith, what's it like working in that place every day? I think that would be cool.
Also known as Mecca, also known as the Intergalactic Weather something. I don't know. But a lot of times it's just like going to work, but every once in a while it hits me that, wow, I get to work in this building and there's Harold Brooks and there's Howie Bluestein. And, it's that really, reminds me of how grateful, how lucky I am to be working there, how grateful I am. But yeah, it's a cool place. School's back in, and about 500 people in the building, and feels almost back to normal.
Jam packed, and I guess the heat levels have come down a bit.
Yes, thankfully. Still up close to 90 today in places. I guess Southwest Oklahoma had some mid 90s, but unsettled pattern this week. So not expecting any more hundreds anytime soon. Hopefully we're done with that for the year.
You got a slight risk tomorrow, Rick?
I think so. Yeah, got a big slight risk covering most of our area, and won't be surprised to see risk areas added later in the week too, especially Friday maybe. So yeah, pretty unstable air mass tomorrow, and some decent shears. So Kim's not on here yet, but hope we can keep the hail away from her and everybody else. But yeah, it's a legit risk tomorrow for sure.
I saw the word very large hail in the outlook. Very is not a good thing.
I don't like any of that. But yeah, let's hope it stays sub very large.
Let's ride up Interstate 44 to Tulsa Town. James Adelot, who is on the air. James,
yes, sir.
What's happening in Tulsa Town? What's happening?
Just going to watch and see what Rick sends our way tomorrow. The forecast soundings do look very haily. So, yeah.
Ooh,
Kim is spreading mattresses on her roof right now, probably.
She has her worried look on already.
The deductible is what?
Did you have your insurance canceled, Kim, or do you still have an insurance policy that's good?
Isn't it miraculous? I am still insured. And boy, is that great, because that's life in Oklahoma. I haven't even seen the forecast. What day are we talking about? What could befall us?
The one that ends in Y. Tomorrow, and then toward the end of the week, probably too.
Okay.
So.
I'd seen that there was some potential for convective activity all week. And initially, when I see that, and the probabilities are fairly low. See, this is a good lesson in what's the reference class, the probability. But I see, low chance for thunderstorms for days on end, sometime around not even really. Well, I guess, gosh, we are late September. This is when I should start worrying about that secondary peak. Typically I get really excited though, oh man, it'll be great to have a couple days of storms. We'll just check back next week and see if I still have a roof. Thanks, guys.
That's a great show title. Check back next week to see if I have a roof. Let's go down to the land of the heat wave in Troy Kimmel in Austin, Texas. Troy, is it still 127 there?
Yeah, it's only got down to 125 today. So we're down a couple
cool
degrees.
Cool wave. We notice you're in the parka there.
97 or 98 today. 97, 96, the highs in Austin today. So looks like we stay that way. The ridge tries to still building back in weekly, but still looking like it's overhead through the end of the week and into the weekend, and maybe some type of cold front down into Texas, but a lot of questions about how far that will come south by next Sunday and Monday.
Let's go to the Arctic Circle in Jen Naramore, who is in the land of the frigids. Jen, thank you for this air mass we have down here. It's refreshing.
You're very welcome. Yeah, I've got long sleeves. I got my hoodie on. It's a little chilly up here. We're down to 47 tonight. We got nothing in terms of any rain, storms, nothing until maybe Monday. And so we're pretty quiet, but temperatures are pleasant. We do come back up into the 80s about late week. So, but right now I'll take it. It's just really, really nice up here, because give it about 6 weeks and then I'm going to be really not happy, because it's when it turns completely cold and I'm not a fan.
Yeah, 'tis the season. Well, Bill Murray, let's bring in our guest. Good to see Tony on the show. Bring in Tony and let's talk here. I'll talk about John. Let's bring him on. Let's go.
Yeah, first we got the famous Tony Rice. Anytime we have a chance to grab him and have him on as a panelist, we welcome him, and that means something's about to happen in the sky. Tony, you're going to talk eclipses in a little bit tonight, right?
Yes, sir.
Outstanding. No chance of any Carrington type event tomorrow, anything like that, right? With this CME we were expecting?
Don't think so. I've not looked at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in the last 5 minutes, but I think we're probably okay.
Okay, good. Well, that's great. Well, we're glad you're here with us tonight. Be ready to jump in and ask lots of great questions of our guest WeatherBrain. Tonight's show is a suggestion of audience member Thomas Webb, who suggested that we have a hydrologist on the show. So We reached out to our friend of the podcast, Kevin Laws, and said, who's the best? And he said, it is definitely tonight's guest WeatherBrain, Chief Hydrologist at the Southeast River Forecast Center, Mr. John Schmidt. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, it
getting
is
homesick, kind of, from hearing all the Oklahoma talk.
Yeah, it's we're heavy Oklahoma tonight, that's for sure. Oklahoma and Texas, but hopefully no really bad weather coming their way. Tell us about yourself, John. Where'd you grow up, and take us kind of through your educational and career path.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. And yeah, thanks for the invite, and thanks for the suggestion from your dedicated viewer there. I was excited to get the contact. I grew up as a military rat. I was talking with James about that when we were spinning up here, and so I grew up all over the place. But I always hope the king of hydrology sounds scary. My grandfather's parents, he's a farmer up in Wisconsin, and so I kind of visiting him always got every TV weather broadcast every night during dinner. He would flip from channel to channel to catch the weather, and so that kind of, I guess, subconsciously put a nugget in the back of my brain. And ended up going to school in Colorado when my dad was stationed out there, and got a degree in civil engineering, and kind of kept dabbling into weather and climate elective courses. And so that kind of made that connection to the Weather Service for me, even though I don't have a meteorology background. But so kind of a little bit of a hydrometeorologist intersection there. But started my career out in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, at the River Forecast Center that's co-located there in Tulsa. So spent a little time with Rick, and I overlapped a little bit, I think, back in the 90s, and got to catch Mr. Adela on TV. And yeah, moved out here about 15 years ago to switch river forecast centers, kind of. So been out here for about 15 years, and just took on the king of the hydrologists. I took over the king of hydrologist role a couple of years ago. Hydrologist in charge out here in the middle of COVID. I call it the COVID HIC. So it was an interesting intro into managing an office in the middle of remote telework and social distancing and all that good stuff, while still trying to carry on our operational forecasting through a bunch of really active hurricane seasons. So yeah, that gets me to where I am now.
So now your degree was in civil engineering, and I really didn't know the path that a hydrologist would take, but that's not an unusual path, because there's several disciplines built into what you do. So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, it's really, we did a cross office kind of experiential thing with a lot of new staff at the local weather office here in River Forecast Center. And I went and tallied up the backgrounds of our different staff, degrees and areas of emphasis, and they range from geographers and geologists, meteorologists. Probably no surprise there, heavy on the crossover meteorologists into the hydro world, since we're in the Weather Service. Mm-hmm. Computer science, math, hydraulic engineering. So yeah, we come from a lot of different backgrounds, and then kind of specialize or get on the job training for this kind of really specific hydrologist position that we take on here, which is, modeling and forecasting water. There's lots of different roles in that hydrologist kind of realm, that outside of the Weather Service, from stream gauging and groundwater hydrology. It splits off into lots of different disciplines: water resource management, water treatment. But ours, yeah, we kind of do a lot of computer programming, a lot of GIS work. So that's kind of the backgrounds that a lot of our folks have, whether they're degreed in that or kind of pick it up as they go.
Now, your center is co-located with the Weather Service in Peachtree City, right? Is it that
yeah.
same way at all the offices? How many are there, and is that always the case?
Yeah, there's 13 river forecast centers around the country, and we are all, make sure I'm not lying, California office is co-located with some state. The California Nevada River Forecast Center is co-located with some state entities there, but I think they have their weather office there as well. In the southern tier of the U.S., for sure, we're all co-located. Central Plains, we're all co-located. The Northeast, we're all co-located. That might be the one, but I think they're co-located as well.
So talk about that setup. Are you part of the Weather Services Forecast Office? Or are you in a separate area or kind of the similar area? How does it work?
So if I open up my door and throw a rock, I can hit the MIC's office. And our ops area is kind of set up that way too, where we're two separate, bureaucratically, we're two separate offices. But yeah, where we share the same break room, share the same tornado shelter, share the same electronic staff. So it's we get to do some collaborative work a little bit more than with some of the other weather forecast offices that we serve, because we are kind of a regional office. We have like 20 weather forecast offices that we serve across the Southeast and Puerto Rico. So we do get to do a little bit more, direct contact and direct training and engagement with the folks here, it's been great.
So what are the rough boundaries of your area?
Yeah, so we get lucky a little bit because we don't have to wait on any upstream river forecast centers to hand off water to us. All of our rivers start along the Appalachians and the Southern Appalachians and drain out to the Southern Atlantic coast or the Eastern Gulf Coast. And so we have the watersheds from Southern Virginia, the Shawan and Roanoke River basins up on, that's our kind of northeastern extent, and then ride the spine of the Appalachians south and west. And then we go as far west as the Upper Tombigbee, so way extreme northeast Mississippi and northwest Alabama, and then down to Mobile Bay. And then San Juan, like I mentioned, which is its own special hydrologic environment.
Yeah, I bet it is. And you mentioned tropical cyclones. You get most of the tropical cyclones that affect the United States, I would imagine.
We get it's a little over half, I think, cross through our area in some form, whether they make landfall or just the remnants travel across our area. Yeah.
So are those the most interesting challenges to you, or is there something else that presents a bigger forecasting challenge?
Yeah, I think Tom. It's definitely gets the most exposure, right? It's the inland flooding is a huge part of all those tropical events, or the majority of them. And they definitely get the media coverage and the eyes on them. But our big flood season really in the Southeast is late winter into spring, when we just get round after round of synoptic scale storms and nothing's transpiring and the lakes all fill up and the soil gets wet, and we just kind of have persistent flooding that lasts for weeks and months. So that's when we get the majority of our flooding. But definitely we don't get 20 inches, 30 inches of rain in a day in the winter, usually. So that's definitely the most intense flooding comes during the tropical season.
Yeah. So talk about your collaboration with your partner weather service offices in your region. How does that work, especially with the one that you're right there co-located with? How do you guys work together, John?
Yeah, so we don't, the river forecast centers don't issue any warning products in the weather service. So all those severe thunderstorm warnings, tornado warnings, tropical warnings, flood warnings, those all come out of the local weather forecast office. So they really have the touch straight to the local emergency management, local observation networks. And we're not staffed, or we're too regional, right, to make that kind of local touch. So that's the biggest difference, I would say, between the river forecast centers and local weather forecast offices. Are we do the modeling and the forecasting, but they're really the direct warnings happen at those local weather forecast offices. And on the water side of things, on the hydrology side of things, about 2/3, I would say, about 2/3 of our weather forecast offices in the Southeast have dedicated service hydrologists. And so here in our co-located office, we have a senior service hydrologist that is great. I think all the co-located offices have co-located. James has Nicole out in Tulsa, and so they're a liaison of the office back to the River Forecast Center, and we work together with them to do local training on hydro topics. But yeah, that's kind of how that relationship works back and forth. And I didn't catch all if Mr. Abelot's making some wisecracks or if he has a serious question in there.
He's the king of puns. And he has a question.
Oh, no, John answered it. So, yeah, I was just wondering, because weather service offices have hydrologists too, and how those roles compared and contrasted and complemented each other. But you explained it.
Yeah, and how in your backyard, James. I don't know if you met her before. Or
Oh yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
But before Rick asks his question, John, I'll follow up on that. How has that role evolved at the Weather Service offices, the service hydrologist?
Yeah, I think right now especially it's interesting because those jobs, I think in different areas they're sought after by different kinds of folks. Sometimes they are just they're weather service folks who have or meteorologists who have an interest in hydrology maybe or want to change paths in their career. Sometimes they are folks who are academically trained, engineers or water resource kinds of folks who move into those roles. And so then the way they conduct the activities in that office, their core mission is really that partner engagement and collecting impacts, doing local training and things like that. But some folks in different weather offices do development work, they do modeling work if they have time to. Some of them do help out with shift rotations. James was talking about being down over in Birmingham. When they get down in the weather offices too, sometimes some of those service hydrologists, if they have, Roger McNeil, yep. Now Mike Garrison is over there. So they'll help fill in if they're meteorologist qualified sometimes. The amount of weather information and tools that are starting to evolve and come out of both river forecast centers with producing ensemble kinds of outputs, and then also from the National Water Center over in Tuscaloosa with more and more volumes of information. I think that role is going to become much more of a learner and liaison and trainer of both their local offices and local partnerships of how to interpret some of those new data sets. So I think the job is increasing in potential and in requirements and workload.
Hey, John, good to see you. It's been a while.
Hey, Rick. Yeah.
Thanks for being on. I know the answer to this, but I think it might be interesting. The WFOs are there 24 hours a day and, of course, responsible for warnings and things like that. But you guys have an important mission, too. But you're not always there 24 hours a day, right? How does that work?
Yeah, that's right. We couldn't really. We're not staffed. Like our River Forecast Center, we have a staff of 15, including the admin staff and the management staff. So that leaves us with 11 forecasters that both perform a hydrometeorology role and the hydrologic forecasting role. So we staff, this is the case for all the Southern Region River Forecast Centers, I think, that we start at 6 a.m. and we staff till 10 o'clock at night. And then when we have big flood events spin up, then we spin up and staff up. And so our schedules kind of all blow up and we've got a great staff that's really flexible. And so we spin into midnight shifts or spin into extended coverage when we need it. So, we have some skill at forecasting, we hope, so we can kind of see it coming a little bit. And so we can kind of stagger our schedules around. And, but yeah, the staff kind of rallies to work. We change it to try to, we're trying to maintain this work-life balance. And so sometimes folks need to, sometimes they can spin into 12-hour shifts and just kind of have handoff and work back-to-back 12-hour shifts for a while, but sometimes they can't. And so we really are quite flexible, and the staff is at rallying to cover that 24-hour staffing. That was a big change when I came from Tulsa to the Southeast. In Tulsa, the flood events kind of come and go pretty stinking quick. And so we would just be 24-hour staffing anytime there was flooding. And I got here in the first big flood event, there was moderate and major extended flooding, and we were shutting the lights off at 10 o'clock, and it gave me a panic attack. How can we close? There's major flooding ongoing, but the major flooding goes on for weeks and weeks in the Southeast coastal plain. And so there's just no way to do that. So, and things don't change that rapidly either when that's going on. So during Idalia, I think we had 4 days that we were 3 or 4 days that we had spun into 24-hour staffing. So yeah, we do what we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. We know things are bad when the River Forecast Center sends that message saying they're going to be there 24 hours. So we appreciate y'all. One other kind of not related, kind of random question. Every weather service office has backup offices. Ours is Tulsa, Fort Worth, Lubbock. I know the RFCs have backup offices too. It's interesting because I think twice a year we'll have a group from the Tulsa River Forecast Center come down to our office because we're either their maybe it's not their backup, but their continuity of operations plan will have some forecasters come down. So you guys have backups too, obviously, right?
So that changed in time a little bit, or are they still doing that twice a year?
Dave, I think they were here I think they've been here in the last 12 months.
Did they bring their own laptops, or did they try to hijack your AWebs?
Both, I think.
So we, up until about 3 years ago, we didn't really have, our backup was self-supported. And so we had laptops that we ported a lot of our software onto that we would pack up into a Pelican case and roll out to a host that would that would host us. With one of the first kind of operational utilities that came out of the National Water Center, that was one of the needs we expressed, was a centralized backup. And so they actually have mirrors we synchronize our modeling system back and forth pretty continuously, all 13 of the river forecast centers to the National Water Center now. And so we'll test that, but we can test that remotely, or we can test that we kind of want to do a COOP kind of thing, right? Because if our facility goes down, and that's not a outlandish thing for Slidell River Forecast Center. So they've had to evacuate a couple of times from a near direct hit of their facility. And so they still have to issue river forecasts, because that usually comes along with the tropical event, right? So they deploy to different places to try to keep that continuity of operations going. So we really kind of, we back ourselves up, but now we're able to do that with a host that is the National Water Center. One last nugget on that, it's in the weeds again, but the river forecast centers in the southern region, we're trying to enable this, what we call mutual aid, where we train up on one another's both hydrometeorological ops and hydrologic ops. And so then we don't necessarily have to deploy, maybe, right? So if their system is still up, we can log in remotely if they can't get in safely to their facility. So it's better than it used to be. It's still kind of intricate, but it's not like what you're describing, where we have pretty smooth transition from primary to secondary to tertiary backup service. We still kind of have to, it's less duct tape than it used to be, but it's still a little bit of duct tape and baling wire.
Hey, John, James in Tulsa again.
Yeah.
How does it work with river forecast centers and communication with the Corps of Engineers, because they're managing a lot of impoundments? And how do you roll forward and decide, or are they solely the ones that make the decision of how they move water in and out of these lakes and watersheds and drainage basins?
Yeah, there's two chief federal partners that we have. One's a USGS with gathering a lot of the observational data, and the Corps of Engineers for sure with impoundments in eastern Oklahoma and out west in Colorado a little bit, and then in our area as well, but across the entire southern tier of the U.S. for sure. And we each of those is pretty unique and individualized how we deal with each core district. They're all a little bit different, I would say. Data exchange is the big thing, that we try to find different ways to exchange data in and out of two different federal agencies. You think it might be a little easier than it is, but it can be a pain sometimes. But we provide inflow forecast and precipitation data to them here in the Southeast, and they turn around and produce outflow. Either here's what we're going to release from this project, or here's what we expect to release going forward, and we'll incorporate that into our downstream forecasts. We're constantly evolving what that looks like. In the Southeast here, it's pretty cool. We have a South Atlantic Division of the Corps of Engineers, which has 4 different district offices, and they have an annual meeting that they have in our facility. And so we come in and do forecaster exchange with them, so they get to see how we forecast the rivers. We go visit their offices, we get to see how they use that information. So it's a very collaborative, necessarily collaborative relationship, because it's inflow information for us for their projects, and then we definitely rely on their outflow information for downstream.
All right, Tony, did you have a question you wanted to ask John?
Yes, sir. I'm up here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and
I was just there in Wilson, North Carolina, this past weekend for soccer.
Home of the North Carolina Tobs, one of the older North Carolina baseball teams. Fantastic show they put on there. We have this challenge from time to time where hurricanes like to park over Eastern North Carolina, and rain and rain and rain and rain. So maybe you could take us through a little bit about how your office handles something like that. You touched on it a little bit when you switched to 24-hour operations, but how do you do some of that forecasting to be able to pass on the local emergency managers? And what kind of data are you using? You mentioned some of the stream sensors and the upriver sensors. Are you using any satellite data? Is it purely GOES data? Are you using something like a GPM to do a little bit of prediction modeling? Just how does that work? How are you keeping us from drowning here in North Carolina during those events?
Well, yeah, I guess we try to give you enough lead time to get out of the way from drowning, right? So that's kind of been an evolution over time with forecasted rainfall. It used to be a lot more custom inside of individual weather office and individual river forecast center for putting together those forecasts. That sometimes led to some inconsistencies, right? Because you'd have different forecasters trying to forecast the same phenomena, and as you get out into some more distant lead times, you could have some pretty significant differences. And so over the past several years, we've, as an agency, tried to take on to be more consistent and be more collaborative in how we put together the rainfall forecast. That's the big thing that we use, right? Instead of, it's that's the key forcing input, future forcing input that we use into our hydrologic models. And so, yeah, that's a process that happens collaboratively now, a couple times a day between the Hurricane Center and the Weather Prediction Center. Up at NCEP and the local weather forecast offices and the river forecast centers as well, to kind of come up with a best deterministic forecast of rainfall. So that's how we try to get more lead time, by incorporating forecasted rainfall into our hydrologic models. But those are still, single value answers. And so for about a decade, we've been incorporating ensemble forcing inputs to try to get longer lead time and try to describe some of that uncertainty. And so we run our models in that mode as well. We can get a longer lead time, but then you get a nice big cone, right? So it's so that gets harder to act on sometimes because it's not an absolute number. And so those are the two main things that we use to try to push down river forecast information through our weather forecast offices, who then engage with that emergency management community. And they really use both of those tools. Folks in North Carolina, especially the Raleigh Weather Office, they kind of were some of the bleeding edge folks who took some of our ensemble information and packaged it in a format that was a little bit easier to understand for folks who weren't building models. And that was really helpful. And so they could try to give longer lead time, descriptions of uncertainty of what the flood threat might be through those ensemble outputs. And then as we get closer and closer to the event, really start to pack in a more of a deterministic answer to get more absolute answers.
And you've got the same forecast communication challenges everybody else does.
Yep. Yeah, that's I would say, I didn't know if we were in a biggest challenges right now. And it's how do you incorporate the uncertainty, right, and describe that fully, but in a way that is actionable by folks. And so, yeah, that's our current frontier, I would say. And maybe, it's not so recent. It's been that way for a while.
John, I've got another probably in the weeds question, but why not?
Sure.
How does land use affect the hydrological models as far as drainage into these basins? Obviously, what's paved over is just going to go right into whatever drainage system is in place. And does that get updated, or at what scale does development start to affect these calculations?
At very small scales, it affects it. So the ability that we have to gauge it and observe it and then incorporate it into our forecasts is at a little bit of a larger scale, because a lot of that is, it's done in the design mode for some of those small land use changes. But then once the development's done, there's not really instrumentation to describe it. So then the kind of modeling we do right now at the River Forecast Center still is more of a catchment based. So it's a little bit larger scale. But over time, we have to go back in and recalibrate those models when we know that there's been changes to land use. So yeah, it affects it right away. So it depends on what scale you're trying to model that on and forecast on. But I would say that's the biggest when we try to describe the differences between water and weather modeling. It's, a parcel of air from this part of the county to this part of the county is pretty similar, and how water moves from this part of the county to this part of the county is tremendously different. And so that's, yeah, people touching water definitely. Anthropogenic manipulation of water is a big headache for us. An opportunity.
So I have a question, John. It's nice to meet you. Wanted to have you explore some of the biggest flooding events that you've covered in your career. And I also want you to talk about maybe some of the more complex situations that you've had. And I'm curious if there's a correlation there. Is big complex, or could there be some of the localized events that are actually more complex to deal with and forecast for?
So yeah, we could talk for hours, I suppose. There's Monday Night Football. Once you get these really extreme precipitation events, right, the soil moisture part kind of fades away because the soil's saturated and all the rain is now run off. And so then our challenges become like Hurricane Florence was one of those. That was one of the, wasn't so long ago, but it's 5 years ago now, I think. But it was highly impactful here in the Southeast, and getting kind of like Hurricane Harvey in Texas, when you start measuring rain in feet, it's getting an accurate, first trying to keep up with the observational network. People are cut off and power's out. And so how you get some of that observational data, the data density starts to kind of go away from you a little bit, or it's latent. You get the data later than you might want it. But then once you get that sizable amount of rainfall, you start getting flows that are above the flow of record. And so a lot of the relationships of flow to stage that we have from the USGS are empirical. So once you start exceeding the flood of record, you start getting into no man's land of not really knowing how that flow equates to stage anymore. So those are a couple of challenges. When Hurricane Maria, that was another really dramatic event that sticks out in Puerto Rico, and that was not so long ago either. But yeah, when you have radomes rolling down mountainsides and rain measured in feet again, and upslope going up thousands of feet, and winds Cat 5 or Cat 4, Cat 5 wind speeds hitting some of the instrumentation to try to measure our rainfall amounts, and not knowing when you get reports of 6 inches of rain in an hour, 7 inches of rain in an hour, and questioning whether or not that's a legitimate rainfall report or not, or if it's the wind moving the rain gauge and shaking it violently back and forth and causing the instrument to just tip erratically. Those are challenges and then extreme events. And then trying to remember a good Oklahoma one from back when I was there. They had the big one after I left here back just a few years ago. That was the big Arkansas River flood that happened. It can get really stressful. You earlier was asked about working with the Corps of Engineers. That gets really stressful for them too. And so trying to make sound decisions. They have an operating playbook, and so do we. And still, just some of the numbers that come out are, they're gut punching sometimes when the reality of some of these large events happen, and there's gonna be some record events, and that can be a personally traumatic kind of thing when you're dealing with flood events, just like folks who go through tornado outbreaks and significant landfalling tropical systems. That it really hits you when when you're in the moment of those events, it doesn't hit you so much. And then as soon as you come on the backside of it and see the scale of things that have been done, that can be a real challenge as well, just on the human side of things, to know what devastation has been wrought and that you had an operational part of that,
So, John, I caught the American Experience the other night about the 1927 flood on the Mississippi and the Delta. And of course, the levee breaks led to tremendous flooding far and wide. How much do you go back and study those type of events to see what black swan event might be waiting on us one day? And how does that flood compare to like the 93 floods in the Midwest and other big floods like that?
If it's in an observational period of record, we certainly use it in calibration of our models, including some of those reservoir models. We model the Corps of Engineer reservoirs as well. But then they tell us what they're going to do. So they get incorporated that way. we get questions sometimes about when we start looking at and running longer term ensemble runs that we can run out sometimes out to a year now using some of the climate forecast system outputs and run those through our hydrologic model, take the current antecedent slow moisture conditions, and then run out a year-long model or something like that. And the question comes up about non-stationarity then, of course, and we don't incorporate that right now, but we're not looking at modeling water out. We're just starting to embark, I think, on looking at seasonal and sub-seasonal up to a year kind of scale stream flow simulations. So that's another climate kind of question there. So I don't know if I answered your question or not. I mean, we do utilize some of that data. The infrastructure changes a lot of times in response to those significant events. And so a lot of these flood control reservoir systems were built in response to giant floods. And so the next giant flood like that won't necessarily respond that way because of a lot of the flood control infrastructure that's in place across the US now. The river forecast centers that kind of make up the whole Mississippi drainage. So from up in the Northern Plains, the Ohio Valley, stomping grounds there in Tulsa, all the way down to Mississippi. They did work with the Corps of Engineers over the last 5 or 6 years to do what they call the flow line study. And they were trying to go and take what this reasonable maximum flood event might be with the current infrastructure that's in place, flood control wise, to see if the levee system is still the appropriate design. So that's kind of in line with what your question was. Maybe it wasn't necessarily taking the 27 flood, but it was taking that flood and other significant snowmelt floods and decaying tropical cyclones maybe, and seeing how those might line up throughout the entire system to make a peak flow somewhere in the Mississippi River.
You go down and you see that structure at Morganza on the Mississippi that's keeping the river in its channel. And you just wonder if there's ever a day when that thing will be, pushed to its limit or beyond.
Yep.
Probably, I think 1973 was the last time it was really tested to the max. But that structure is impressive for sure.
It is.
So go back and, we've covered a lot of ground here tonight that's fascinating. Talk about from the data assimilation process all the way to the forecast for my gauge at my location. How does that process work from sort of beginning to end? And how do the Weather Service forecasters monitor that to know when to issue those advisories and warnings on streams and tributaries?
Yeah, so the modeling we do in-house here is we do it in a continuous fashion. So every day we're saving what those model states look like. And the forecasters we have, even in a period right now, we have a little bit of flooding left over from Idalia along the coast, but otherwise we're pretty tranquil weather in the southeast. That's usually how we have it this time of year if we don't have a big tropical cyclone. But every day they're going through and pulling in all the USGS information and comparing that to our models and making slight adjustments in real time to our models to match up with that observed data. So that's kind of how we assimilate the stream flow data into our operations. And that also includes reservoir discharge information from the Corps of Engineers and from our folks who run hydropower projects in the southeast. We have a bunch of those. So we pull in at a certain resolution and scale, we pull in all the data that's available to kind of tune in our models in real time. So that's kind of happening on one side. And then on our other side, our hydrometeorologist side, they're pulling in hourly rainfall amounts from USGS networks, from mesonets. The Oklahoma mesonet's got a huge one. Some other universities have mesonets around the southeast as well. We pull in some of our hydropower folks, pull in precipitation networks. They have precipitation networks as well that we pull in. Water management districts down in Florida. For the most part, anybody who has those networks, they're happy to give us those data. And so we assimilate those data in and modify the radar estimates of rainfall every hour. And then we pull in, if there's folks who are listening to our CocoRoS observers, we pull in that data every day. We take that data network as well as the Weather Service Cooperative Observer Network, and we take those independent data sets and compare those to our accumulated rainfall over a day and assimilate that data correct and make it as good as possible. So those are the two kind of main data assimilation things we do to keep our models tuned in and ready to go. And then when we start exceeding different criteria, flood criteria or not, some of our forecast locations are based on our local weather offices come and tell us we have this kind of, we have an amphitheater that's built in the floodplain on purpose, but we need to know a little bit before. That's the floodplain usage of this area, but we can't have a show if it's going to be impacted. And so they might have lower criteria that will issue flood forecasts for. And then anytime those are going to be exceeded, we shoot those forecasts out, and then the local weather office does that localized warning.
John, it's really nice to meet you. I find your whole science so fascinating, and I don't think people really appreciate just how much more complex it is to try to understand and forecast, model the interactions between atmospheric processes and then what is going to result on the ground. And it is so important for people. And that's where my question for you comes in. You've been talking a lot about, the infrastructure that we're putting in floodways. That's actually been the subject of a lot of public policy debate, and with programs like the National Flood Insurance Program that some have argued subsidize risky behavior. They just have started, as of this coming month, they will be implementing a new methodology for determining the risk rating that a parcel should have. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on this. It's supposed to be transitioning us from the previous methodology, which was really based on, well, have you flooded before? Well, if not, good for you. Your rates may be lower, even if you're actuarially, just as risk prone as some other parcel that happens to have experienced a flood. Now they're looking at, okay, what really is your exposure? Absent the whims and wiles of the atmosphere having produced a flood where you are, you could still be at substantial risk. You're nodding. I figured this had to be something of a big topic in your discipline.
Well, so tangentially for us. So we don't get pulled into the policy kind of framework, but certainly we're aware of it, right? And so I think so that's the short answer. We don't really get pulled into the policy end of it. So then our role is, how do we make those communities more resilient, or perhaps, provide some manner of mitigation or assist in the mitigation. And, we don't really have I don't know if Rick, so they've had storm ready forever, and it kind of started in Oklahoma, actually, right? And there's not really a flood ready. I shouldn't say that. FEMA might have a flood ready program, but the Weather Service doesn't really have a, I don't go out.
Community rating program.
But Rick can talk about, right? Rick, you still go out and help rate storm ready communities. Is that a true statement? He's still around. So we don't. We don't really.
Lost Rick.
I think the warning coordination meteorologists still kind of head out and help do some of those rating of folks to help with their insurance rates. That's part of why they do that storm ready. It helps their insurance rates. We don't go out and actively help rate risk assessment of flood prone areas. Now, one thing
Well, I was just going to say, the program is managed by FEMA. NOAA, FEMA, there's a different relationship to the event that you guys have there. You're in the business of prediction. I think I'm more curious about then, just from your point of view, if you could comment on the way that this change might help to convey something of reality in an important way, because what you're looking at when you're forecasting is this. You're trying to account for all of the real variables that could, lead to how water flows, where water flows, and the inundation that will result. And it had to be something of a frustration for hydrologists to see something even for their own home, the way that your risk could be rated based so much on previous event history and less on the characteristics of the surface that your home occupies.
So that is, I think we'll start to get a visualization of that reality a lot more now. We're moving into doing operational flood inundation mapping, not the FEMA risk maps, like the 100 or 200 to 500 year recurrence interval, but more of the real-time flood inundation mapping that's based on our forecasts. And so as an agency, we're starting to roll that out presently. And so that'll be maps in the hands of forecasters who are seeing the impacts of their actual forecast. That'll be really interesting. That'll show a map with structures inundated. Right now, when our forecasters are doing that, it's a lot of looking at data and not the visualization of it. So I think if we had a service, so we get a little bit desensitized. Well, it's hard to do that now with social media and media in general. We see all the flooding imagery as it's happening as well, right? But we're not intricately working with the people who are being flooded like the local service hydrologists are from the weather forecast offices, who that might touch them a lot more. Your question might be a lot more hitting home with them because they see that. They're out working with the emergency managers right in those areas.
John, I know I'm asking on the wrong side of the country here, but after the record snowpack in the Sierra, how is snowmelt modeled? Because that's so complicated.
Yeah, so that's an out west specialty that we don't have to do that here in the Southeast. Although we do model snow, but not as a snowpack really, right? Because we get these like mixed phased events or whatever that can be a real hassle on their own, just trying to keep track of what's going to run off from rain/snow/ice as these storms move through the Southeast. But our folks out in Tulsa, right, they've got the headwaters of the Arkansas River up in Colorado. So they do have a water supply mission and a snowmelt modeling kind of component to their operations. So it's similar. It's the same kind of issues. It's another conceptual model of what the snowpack looks like and how much water is locked up in it. They layer them out by elevation zones because how inside of an individual catchment, right, how the snowpack behaves changes by elevation and when those will melt out and how much snow is kind of contained in those different elevation zones. And then they monitor those. People go out, NRCS and some other groups, National Resources Conservation Service, and some other folks will go out and take snow core measurements in those northern tier states. Cooperative observers from the Weather Service will go out and take go out and measure snow like they measure rainfall and kind of input those into models of how much snow is available. And then you just get a much longer signal usually, right? When that is melting out, it lasts for weeks and months as that snow melt season goes on. So yeah, we don't have to do it much down here. The northern tier and out west, they do for sure. And yeah, they'd be your expert, James, on that.
Now, and it's interesting if people want to just see the effect of the snow melt. There are a lot of reservoirs out of the Sierra that the seasonal variation in those reservoir levels is incredible to see.
Yeah.
You were talking about GIS earlier as a job skill. One thing in the 2019 floods that Tulsa did, because we had the Arkansas River flood stage and there was a lot of angst about that. They had the city of Tulsa. It wasn't River Forecast Center, but the city of Tulsa had a ArcGIS web portal they opened up for people, and they could go in, zoom down as you can with ArcGIS and click on various forecast levels of the Arkansas River. If it hits 20 feet, this shape files your inundation. It was really, really neat. And I thought, the more ways you can communicate this, the better. But I think I'd never seen a city do that before. Not that I'd looked for it, but when the city made that available, I thought that was a really slick.
Did the Corps of Engineers produce that?
I don't know. They may have. I just know it was a city server that was pushing it.
So starting, so I mentioned before that that's a new data service that's coming available from the National Weather Service, this flood inundation mapping. Year one of that rollout is ending the end of this month, and that's the first 10% of population in the U.S. is going to have a public-facing server of flood inundation mapping. That's some parts of Texas and some parts of the Northeast. In the next fiscal year, that'll encompass another 20% of the U.S. population, and the Tulsa CW County warning area is one of those areas. So they'll be doing some inundation mapping that will be a public-facing thing at the back end. So reach out to the Weather Forecast Office there in Nicole, and reach out to the River Forecast Center there. And then Alabama is also part of that 30% of flood inundation mapping rollout. So for the rest of the folks here, or some of us who are near or in Alabama, that's another part of that coverage area. So the state of Alabama will have those types of maps available by the end of next fiscal year as well. So the training part will roll out over the next year.
Ooh, that's exciting. I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
One little thing that happened during the 2019 flood, the level of the river was just a few inches below the forecast, which made a world of difference. It's fascinating to me that we're that good at forecasting water flow. I mean, rain's one thing, but just water flow. And there was speculation from some of the city folks that one thing that was not modeled super well was a scouring of the riverbed, because the river water was moving so quickly. And if anybody's seen the Arkansas River in Tulsa, it is pretty much the epitome of a barely flowing, lazy sandbar. And they think that scour factor from the fast moving water may have been worth a few inches on the bottom of that volume.
Yeah, that's so the way we model volumes of water, right? And so we convert that to elevation, which is relatable to either inundation or to where you are, right, and what the impact's going to be. We do that through these rating tables, and so they're empirical, and they can be noisy, especially with sandy bottom channels, and especially getting some higher flow events, right? So you might not have had a measurement at that flow event since the last time it was at that flow level, and so it can be decades sometimes in between those, and you can have land use changes. So yeah, there's a bunch of reasons. The USGS, they get out there in the middle of those flood events, and they look like crazy people sometimes out there on bridges or on boats trying to get accurate stream flow measurements to equate to that given stage out in the middle of that terrible weather. And then that's cycled right back to the River Forecast Center, and we incorporate those latest measurements into coming up with those updated stage forecasts. So yeah, I mean, the geomorphology or the sandy bottom or the floodplain changes. We had an event down in the southeast here when I first got here that was, it had been decades, 70 years, 80 years since this area had gotten to a certain flood level. And we were way under simulating the stage. And every time this next stage come in, we were cutting under. The USGS got out, took a measurement, and our flow simulation was right on, but the stages were off by feet. And after the event, we went back and considered it, and there was substantial changes to the floodplain since 70 years ago. It used to be cotton fields, and now it was piney woods. And so it was a forest with understory in it now, which slows the water down, forces the stages up, right? So yeah, sometimes we don't know that until we're in the midst of the event. So a few tenths of a foot sounds good on the Arkansas as far as accuracy.
So John, James A. mentioned snowmelt. I'm always fascinated by ice jams. Talk about the impact of those in forecasting, and what other characteristics around the country can pop up and make for a challenging forecast.
Yeah, that's its own. I don't know. We have enough puzzles in the southeast, I suppose. We don't have that one, obviously, ice jam flooding. But yeah, that's an interesting physical phenomena. I don't know anything about how they forecast it. I know they monitor it using a lot of remote sensing and a lot of eyes on the ground to determine when ice jams flooding are likely. Another one was up in the Mendenhall Glacier up by Juneau, when they had a big glacial dam release. I don't know if you saw that in the news back a couple of months ago, where yeah, they had this tremendous glacial dam release that was washed away some homes and things like that. So yeah, ice can wreak havoc with water flow as well.
Yeah, no question about that. That's for sure. And you've been mentioning ensembles a bit. How are you using them at this point? Just running your water models with different inputs, or what other ways is it becoming of common use?
Yeah, that's the main way is to just have this wide variety of forecast rainfall events that go through our existing antecedent soil moisture conditions. And so if you guys are familiar with the ensembles of the GFS or the NAIFs or all the different flavors that there are. So we perturb the different initial conditions, right? We come up with flap the butterfly's wings and do that kind of thing, and come up with slightly different outcomes, which sometimes can be dramatically different in the rainfall footprint or amount. And so we'll run those through and get a variety of answers, and that helps us talk to perhaps, right, how certain we are about some future thing occurring, depending on what that spread looks like. We've across the country, the river forecast centers have finished over many years now, but this past year we wrapped up putting out the hydrologic ensemble forecast system. That has it's got an added bonus to that one is that it bias corrects the GEFS over the last 15 years. The ones we have been using historically, we just kind of use the raw outputs. So we have a bias corrected input then, and then we also have the ability to quantify some of the hydrologic modeling error on the backside of it. And so then we can describe some of the error on the front end of it and some of the error on the back end of it as well, to kind of come up with a cone that describes some of the uncertainty. I think the nut that we still have to crack with that is how to convey that information in a consumable way, right? So we have some folks who can do risk-based decision making, some water utilities who can quantify, like if I make this decision, it's going to cost me this much. If I make this decision, it'll cost this much. They can weight that based on risk and probability and come up with a better answer. It's harder in the emergency management community, right? Because it's also local. Your decision, the risk and cost are very, it's hard to quantify them. And so it's harder to use in that. So we talk about them more in terms of confidence, I think, than in making decisions explicitly.
I think in Weatherwise magazine earlier this year, on the job column or feature, they interviewed a hydrologist, and she said that measuring the snowpack sometimes is a pretty uncertain thing. And going back to James A's question, I think they actually fly airplanes to measure the snowpack. Is that really a thing?
It is, yeah. Our friends at the Hydrologic Remote Sensing Center have, you can Google up their site, NOHRSC, and they'll publish their flight lines, and they'll fly a flight line and then try to extrapolate what the remotely or directly but remotely sensed estimates of snow water equivalency are, and then compare those to their model of snow water equivalency. They used to fly this equipment for a while on soil moisture missions as well in the summer, and they would fly those to try to latently measure soil moisture conditions, not just snowpack. That is a thing.
So how do they actually measure it? What piece of equipment, and what's the physical process, John?
I don't know what the sensor is. What kind of ray is bounced down through the snowpack? I don't know what it is.
Yeah, they said that it was very altitude dependent, though. It had to be, they had to fly very low level missions. So, we've got a very contentious water situation between Alabama, Georgia, and Florida there on the Chattahoochee. Talk about the emerging role of hydrologists as we go through time and in water resource management as it becomes more and more of an issue.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, we'll learn from our folks out west who've been dealing with this for generations now. But yeah, it used to be just an Intermountain West issue, right? And a Colorado River issue maybe, and not so much anymore as we swing through extremes and more competition for that water. I think that lessons. I'm hopeful. That's another policy kind of decision, right? I'm hopeful that lessons learned from folks who've dealt with this for a long time are embraced, and we will. I would say, I guess, out west, the Weather Service is involved with assisting in trying to optimize water supply reservoirs by using some of these ensemble outputs when they can demonstrate. So that's another one of these audiences that can quantify, right, these risk-based decision-making kind of things, and they can say, okay, here's our skill at predicting what the winter snow season is going to produce as far as inflows, and they can try to more dynamically manage the flood control versus the water supply, kind of dual opposed missions of a lot of these large structures the Corps manages. They can try to be a little more dynamic in how they manage those to try to save water. and they're having some success out west doing that recently. That's a very emergent kind of science and policy.
So what are some of the other emerging technologies and innovations that you see coming in the next couple of decades, and how do we prepare for that?
Yeah, it's always it's hard enough predicting the future in 5-day chunks that we do right now for water. Machine learning, we're just starting to kind of embrace that. I mentioned we do kind of these catchment-based conceptual models right now. We're moving a little bit more towards physically based models, but we're also seeing folks who are showing skill in doing machine learning kind of simulations of stream flow and stream level. So that's interesting. We're starting to see some of that and working with some university partners and NASA and trying to evaluate that side by side with what we do. The flood inundation mapping is that will be described with a lot of different words that are flowery, game changing, and it is right now. You're probably familiar with seeing some of our hydrographs on our website that show a line on a map, right? And then there's a few impacts that kind of say this highway might go underwater. Well, if you have them, it's kind of like when we put the 88D out and then put tornado vortex signature tracks out, right? And now you can see, okay, here's the forecast, here's what's going to be inundated. When we can get to the point that those are skillful and reliable, I mean, those will be wildly successful, and that'll be coming out. I mean, the first generation of those are coming out now, as I mentioned, and so as those evolve and get better, those will be amazing. 10 years from now, an amazing tool. Then some of the more complicated, we've modeled where we can model historically, and so when the big joke always is water goes downhill, how hard can it be, right? Water goes downhill. Well, it goes down energy, and so especially in the coastal areas and in areas of complicated hydrology or hydraulics, water goes all different directions. And so some of the models we have in place right now really can't capture a lot of that in a continuous way. We have models in the industry and in academia that can represent it, but to try to run those at a fidelity and a time step and a tempo in an operational environment can get tricky. And so as compute improves with that, and as some of the physically based models improve with that, I think that'll be being able to describe how water is moving in really complex areas will be something else that is done regularly, not just in very specific locations.
John, Troy Kimmel here, and my apologies, I had to duck out for a second.
Yeah.
It's good to see. Thank you for being with us.
Sure.
I have sort of a general question, and I apologize if it's something that someone else has brought up, but I've always thought it's interesting, when I have my friends at the West Gulf River Forecast Center up in Fort Worth and places like that. On this group, we sit here and we talk about what knowledge people have of geography. And we talk about sometimes they can't even identify what county or parish that they're in. And what's even more interesting, and I find it here in Austin especially, is really, John, your business is all about basins. And my question, in a sense, is, do people have any idea? I have people here in Austin that honestly talk to me, say, well, we got some rain in Austin, so I guess that'll help Lake Travis. Well, that's great, except Lake Travis is 10 miles to the west, back in the other direction. But your business is all about basins. And I would be willing to say, we talk about geography, people are geniuses when it comes to counties and parishes. They have no basis, really. They just don't know what basins they're in, right, John? Or am I wrong there?
No, that's true. And I think that, the same kind of thing with people. I think once you're affected, if you live immediately in the floodplain, you probably know a little bit more about what river affects you. Yeah. If you're a little bit more, zoomed out, it doesn't affect you day to day, you might not know, what creek you're driving over that might be flooded. If you move new to an area, the same kind of thing with lots of weather hazards, right? When you're new to an area and you're not familiar with that weather, then certainly those folks aren't. But no, we run into the same thing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting in Austin because you go 20 miles to the northeast up in Williamson County, people think, well, that water goes in the Colorado. No, it doesn't. It goes in the Brazos. Yeah. And then you go to the south, no more than about a county, and you say, well, that water ends up somewhere in the no, it doesn't. It ends up in the San Marcos River, the Blanco River, or Guadalupe River to the south. And to me, that's just fascinating in a way, because it really determines where that rain hits the ground in those areas. So it's really interesting to look at. I love going and looking at maps, John, that show me basins. Just show me basins and with counties on them, because I think it really it tells a heck of a story.
The USGS used to have a really neat tool. You could go click anywhere in the country and it would draw a line to where the water goes from it.
Yeah.
So you can see if it still exists or not. That's a pretty cool thing. Google around for that. But yeah, you could go and click on a map and it would show you where it's going.
Yeah. Again, we appreciate you being with us, and I thank you for answering that question. I was hoping we didn't cover it when I ducked out. So thank you.
Nope.
Hey, John, you mentioned this a couple of times, the National Water Center in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
Give us a little synopsis of what is it that they do and what is your relationship with them?
Yeah, they're kind of our, lots of different stuff. They've been stood up here in the last decade. I was just over there last week. We had our annual hydro leadership meeting over there. And so they're doing a lot of synthesizing of research, a lot of enabling of research through a cooperative institute now that's housed at the University of Alabama. So they're trying to answer some of these questions. When you ask me about like what's coming 10 years and 20 years, they're doing some of that research right now and enabling some of that through that cooperative institute. It's called CIROH is the catchy name for that, CIROH. So then at the National Water Center, they have an operational unit there. And they are maintaining a national scale kind of watch on ongoing flood and water resource kinds of questions. They, I think that's it. Thanks, James. And they kind of brief out national level partners. So National FEMA, National Corps of Engineers are like a consolidator of information. There's also a national water model that's kind of an operational extension of some of that research that's ongoing. And so they're producing CONUS scale hydrologic outputs that is quite novel, the first of its kind internationally. And so they can produce streamflow simulations all across the country. So we're starting to identify ways to incorporate that into our forecast process. And it's on every river. Right now, our forecasts are on rivers that have long periods of record from the USGS and tried and true kind of locations that we have established modeling systems on. This CONUS scale modeling system has simulations for every river, whether they're gauged or not. So it's an evolutionary kind of modeling system. The next generation of that, we lovingly call it next gen, is coming in about 2 years, I think now. And it will allow us to introduce discrete models in different, right now it just kind of runs one modeling framework across the entire country. And in the future, we'll be able to implement specific models to answer specific modeling questions in different parts of the country. So once we get to that point, I think we'll have a lot more skill out of that CONUS modeling system, be able to incorporate that into our operations a lot more. So it's new still compared to the National Weather Center, right? So I remember going in there back in Tulsa. So still relatively new. It's mostly staff now. So it's, a lot of, and that I mentioned the flood inundation mapping efforts as well, that those are coming from that center as well. So that's a big immediate operational impact that will be coming in the next year for Alabama.
Hey, John, I'm sorry, James. I just want to ask one quick one, because I'm noticing from Tuscaloosa, and maybe you can kind of help me understand it. They're actually issuing some experimental products, text products. Yeah. Essentially, what I sort of equate with the mesoscale precipitation discussions out of Washington, and those are really nice products we're seeing out of Tuscaloosa. But I assume those are at this point kind of experimental, right?
Yeah, and so they're really looking for, I think, on those experimental tags or on the websites, right? There's a way to provide input and feedback. They're really looking for that. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah,
James,
if you like that, if you like it, or there's parts of it you'd rather hear more about, provide feedback on those. They love to hear about that.
Thank you, James. Back to you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm thinking back, and I've been doing this since World War I. And one of the greatest hydrology events I have worked here in terms of river flooding was in April of 1979. This is before everybody on this show was born, except Troy. You were here. Bill Murray was here.
I was here.
And most people remember April 1979 for what? Wichita Falls, the tornado that hit Wichita Falls, Texas. Terrible Tuesday. But the truth is that same synoptic system brought a tremendous river flooding event to this state. And I'm not so sure the messaging was that good as I recall, and I'm not so sure the forecasting was that good. Just give us a quick synopsis on. So here we are in 2023. How much better are you at forecasting river flooding in 2023 as opposed to 1979?
Yeah, so you're right. That predates me.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I remember. So some of like the science and the physical nature of the science is similar on some of those, but the data assimilation and the automation and the computer processing is, generations faster and better. And so I would say we still rely on some of the underlying models, but yeah, just the ability to integrate data, manual stream gauges. I don't know how dense the network of automated stream gauges was back then either. Awareness, the compute power. We had a singular computer back in Washington, D.C. I assume that was around back then. It was phased out when I started my career in the early 90s, sending jobs back to a central computer, and then you'd have one shot and you get the answer back and you'd have to kind of interpret the output. And now we have a very interactive process that our forecasters go through, that we can do a lot of what if scenarios and a lot of manipulation of the models in real time. So I don't know.
So you're a lot better now than you used to be. That's good. So in the tornado business, we focus on a couple of metrics: POD, probability of detection, and then FAR, false alarm ratio. How do you verify your forecast and warnings, or do you?
Yeah. So the warnings are on similar criteria, and they're kind of binary like that, and lead time as well. And it's so the actual, like, if James A was asking earlier about like tenths of a foot off, right? So those are really they're relative to the river you're forecasting. So those we would do some verification, like doing root mean square error of heights, but those they're related to the river you're forecasting, right? So if your forecast only can rise 5 feet, then a root mean square error of 1.5 feet is not really good. But if your river can go up 50 feet, then 1.5 feet would be great. So a lot of the flood warnings themselves and flash flood warnings are done with the PODs and CSIs in kind of a binary way, and then with lead time.
And one more question. I know we got to get to Tony Rice in a second, Bill, but who's your boss? I'm trying to figure out kind of the pecking order here. Because in a WFO, you got a meteorologist in charge, and then you've got the southern region, and you've got the headquarters. How does it work in the river forecasting business?
So we're organized as line offices, right, along with weather forecast offices. So my boss is the regional director at Southern Region, same as the meteorologist in charge.
Okay, awesome. So what we're going to do here, John, and again, I don't know how long you can stay with us. If you can, that would be great.
Sure.
We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to go to Tony's astronomy report that was recorded. And then we're going to have Jen's This Week in Tornado History, and we're going to come back and we're going to do a quick email segment with Jen, and then we're going to talk with Tony about astronomy issues, including the eclipse next year. And we're going to do picks of the week, where everybody on the show here has a cool pick of the week somehow related to weather. And we'll do a weather roundup and a lot more to go here as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
As the annular eclipse on October 14th, stretching from Oregon to Texas, draws closer, we're probably going to hear the word rare mentioned a lot. But are solar eclipses really rare? Like most things, the answer is it depends. So let's dig in. And many thanks to Xavier Joubier and his solar eclipse database for help with these dates and numbers. Globally speaking, solar eclipses aren't that rare. There will be more than 160 of them during the average person's lifetime. But each of those eclipses can occur anywhere on Earth, including the middle of the ocean. So that's not a great metric. Not many people can jump on a plane or a cruise ship and get into the eclipse path to really experience it. So how often are solar eclipses more conveniently accessible? Let's consider Albuquerque, New Mexico, one of the larger cities within the October 14th annular eclipse path. If the show there is ruined by clouds or residents can't be bothered to put on their eclipse glasses and step outside, how long must they wait until the next one? The last one passed through just 11 years ago, after all. Can't be that long. Looking at NASA's 5 millennium calendar of solar eclipses, it shows that 25 annular eclipses passed directly through Albuquerque, but that was across 5,000 years. The next to pass through Albuquerque will be on October 8th, 2238. The next, even a day's drive away, is nearly a century out. But is it that it's an annular eclipse, the ones that occur at a time when the moon is a little bit further away and a little smaller in the sky, leaving that ring of fire? Is that what's rare here? Well, not really. They actually make up a third of all solar eclipses and are more common than the total eclipses that we hear so much about, which make up about a quarter. The last total to pass through Albuquerque was in 1806, and the next is going to be on 2205. The last one within a day's drive was 1878, and the next will be in 2045. If you want rare, you look to hybrid solar eclipses, and they occur right at the knife's edge of the moon's orbit, starting out as annular and turning total, like the one this past April that passed through northwestern Australia. Hybrids make up less than 5% of all solar eclipses. Again, looking at Albuquerque and across those 5,000 years, there's never been a hybrid solar eclipse passed directly through. The only one that's come close was back in 1713. So our solar eclipse is rare. When you look at it from a science communication point of view and consider that people's horizons end at their literal horizon, the answer is yes. So if you're near the October path, don't miss out. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, September 20th, 2000, an F4 tornado hit Xenia, Ohio. This tornado developed on a golf course approximately 2 miles southwest of the Greene County Airport. There were cyclonic swirls in corn and bean fields and initially numerous snapped and twisted trees. The tornado raced off to the northeast toward the town of Xenia at 65 miles per hour. Along the total 9-mile path, there were approximately 250 homes damaged or destroyed. Cars were thrown from the Highway 35 bypass into ditches, and 4 semis were thrown up to 400 yards near the fairgrounds. Over 40 businesses were damaged or destroyed, including the local Walmarts, the Kroger, and tire discounters. 6 churches were damaged. There was one fatality from this tornado, Mr. James Mullins Jr. Per the Dayton Daily News, Mr. Mullins was retired from General Motors. He was at home with his wife when the tornado struck. He was killed and she was seriously injured. This was the second time in 26 years that the town of Xenia was hit by a major tornado, and some of the same areas struck by the 1974 F5 were hit once again by this F4. We have more details about this event and hundreds more at tornadotalk.com.
Time to dig into the email inbox and see if anything is in there.
We do have some stuff in here. Some of it I'm not bringing up tonight. I'm going to hold it back until Neil is here because we do have some modelly type stuff in there. So we'll wait for him. Thank you to everybody who's written us some emails and with your show suggestions and everything. It's just awesome. Thank you so much. We also have an email that came in. It's pretty much tied to somebody's pick of the week, so we'll hold off on that one. And then we do have this one that came in from Jennifer Pratt, and it's I want to say it's the Aggie Stadium picture where lightning within 8 miles, kickoff is suspended, please seek shelter. It says it on the big Jumbotron, and then everybody's underneath the Jumbotron. So she's like, just thought you guys would like to see this. All we can do is give people the information they need. You can't make them use their brains to process it. So sadly, we do what we can. And then I do have a question from our friend James Lewis. And most of this, I think everybody's here but Neil, so I'll ask this question. And I may have tried it before, but I can't remember. But anyway, how did everyone on the panel find out about WeatherBrains, and how long have they been listening to it? Were most of the panelists aware of the show for a long time, or did some of them only find out about it after being invited for an episode? So I thought we could go around the horn real quick and answer that question for all the brainies here. Other than Bill, he doesn't count, and James, of course, fan.
I was just told to show up.
Yes, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what about you, Troy?
I received a threatening call from James Spann from Birmingham.
Yeah. Yes. Threats. Death threat. Yeah.
Command performance.
Said he had friends in Austin. I didn't know what that meant. So,
I know people.
No, I knew of it because, quite a track record through the years for what James and so many of the people that were part of this. And my main thing was, I said, James, this is WeatherBrains. Are you sure you want me? That was the first question. So, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure? And I ran it back by him again and then called the lawyers in. And before we all knew it was all history. So good.
Awesome. What about you, Kim?
Gosh, I mean, trying to remember, Bill, I met Bill and James Spann when I came out shortly after the April 27th, 2011 outbreak, because I was studying that as a case study for my dissertation. And Bill, I can't even remember how you and I got linked up in that, but he drove me to the airport at like 4 a.m, something like this, to go back to Oklahoma after I'd finished my interview.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, you guys invited me to be a guest on the show to share some of my findings and discuss with all of you. And I remember my internet was down, so I was calling you from like the landline, like literally corded phone in my parents' house, where I was whenever we did this show. And somehow after that, you still decided, hey, this is a good person to keep around. So I was on the show periodically until, gosh, it was like 2017. You invited me on, Bill, as a guest weather brain to talk about flood insurance reform. And because I'd worked that on the Hill a couple of years prior and was following all of the developments of the new things. And after that, you were like, you know what, we could just use somebody who knows some of the things that could we train you? That was basically it was several stages of like socialization of the idea of Kim, do you like being on the show? You like sharing your knowledge. This isn't really terrifying. It's actually pretty fun. You should come join us. Yes. And then I was assimilated.
We were just trying to upgrade our brain power.
What about you, James A?
I've heard of the show and actually listened a lot while commuting. So it would take 2 or 3 days to listen to a whole show. But this goes back to, gosh, some of the tornado days, I think, in Alabama, and that's probably how I got my awareness. And then, like Kim was on it a couple of times, one for a poster presentation that Steve Piltz and I did at an NWA about side lobe contamination on a storm over Tulsa that ended up producing a tornado, but not from the mechanism that anybody thought it was going to. And then kind of a shot into my master's thesis research about warning perceptions. And then you sent me a threatening email. Nobody had a choice to come back as a panelist except Kim. This is crazy. But yeah, Spann said, I know people in Tulsa. You come on the show.
Yeah.
Moose and Rocco.
Absolutely.
All right, Rick, what about you?
I had heard about the show. My first when I first got tuned into it for real was, I think Bill approached me after a conference at either NWA or AMS after I'd done a presentation and scouting for guests. And I can't remember what the topic was or the year was, but I think it was pre-2013. It was further back than that. And then just got to be a guest several times. And yeah, I got that same threatening email, and I tried to leave. I tried to leave a couple of times, but they just keep pulling me back.
You can check out on this show, but you can never leave.
Never leave. And I'm so glad. So.
Oh, man. Well, I'll tell you my part, and then I'll throw it to Tony Rice, because then we're going to bring Tony on too and talk about eclipses. So I thought that would be a great transition. But for me, I got threatened by Bill Murray and was invited onto the show. I think it was 2020 to tell my career story. And then I remember doing another show where it was like the top tornado events, and we didn't even get through them all because we talked so much about all the different historical tornadoes. And then I was asked to be part of the panel, and very just honored for that. And I did know about the show prior, but I really didn't listen a whole lot, but I have gone back to listen to several shows. And so Tony, talk about how you learned about WeatherBrains, and then you're a big part of our show and our family too. And then we'll open it up for Bill to bring you in to talk about all the different astronomy fun stuff.
Well, the blame here goes to Nate Johnson, local meteorologist here now working with NBC Universal, and a good buddy of mine. He described the show, and I've listened to it some. I'm a closeted weather weenie, not just a space weenie. So I'd listened to the show some, initially at Nate's urging, but he referred to it as science ramblings. And that really appealed to me. He says, "You science ramble pretty good. Would you like to come on and science ramble with us from time to time about your brand of crazy?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." I've been doing it ever since, and it's a privilege to be able to get my 2.5 minutes out every week and get people interested in looking up in the sky. And I really appreciate what everybody does here, because what I do is immaterial when it gets compared to some of the severe weather topics that get talked about here, and the preparations and the warnings that go out as a part of it. So I just hope that my science ramblings from time to time are land and are interesting.
They are every single week, Tony Rice. It's one of my favorite parts of the show. We're coming up on an annular eclipse, as you just described, followed by a total eclipse in very visible parts of the United States. Talk about the difference between the two types of eclipses and what makes each happen, Tony.
Yeah, we touched on
it a little bit during your part, but go a little deeper there.
Yeah, so there's 4 types of eclipses essentially. There's total, there's annular, there's hybrid, and that's that knife's edge one. That one's really fascinating. And those 3 are all based on where the moon happens to be in its orbit. The moon's orbit is not completely circular. It is a little bit extended in some parts and a little bit closer. So those total eclipses, they occur when the moon is at its closest to Earth, near that perigee point. An annular eclipse occurs when the moon is closer to its apogee. And the easy way to remember those two apart is apogee starts with an A, as does away. The moon is more away. And we all learned from our friend Grover on Sesame Street that when you're far, you're smaller, and when you're near, you're closer. So that's what's happening here. The angular measurement of the moon when it's closer to you is large enough to cover up the Earth, or sorry, to cover up the sun. Eclipses are really, really special, and we don't know that there is anywhere else, certainly in the solar system. And as we find more exoplanets outside of our own solar system, we don't know that it works this way anywhere else. The moon is just big enough and the sun is just far enough away. The sun's, of course, many, 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 many times larger than the moon and the Earth and the rest of the planets, but it's at just the right position and the moon is just the right size that during those total eclipses, it will completely cover the sun. But as you mentioned, the annular eclipse is coming up in October. That is annular because the moon is a little bit farther away. It will not completely cover the sun. And when you hear the word annular, the first word that comes to mind, the first meaning that comes to mind is annual, meaning it happens yearly. These do not happen yearly. Annular here is coming from annulus, or ring, and that's leaving the Johnny Cash style ring of fire around the moon. And annular eclipses work just like total eclipses in that there is a path. So the path of this annular eclipse is running from Central Oregon down through northern Nevada and then the south central Utah, and then runs pretty much diagonally across New Mexico. That's why I picked Albuquerque as our analog, or as our star city, if you will, during that talk. And then it runs through Texas, beginning in kind of the Midland area, and then running out through Corpus Christi. So if you're in that path, and the path is a couple hundred miles wide, you're going to be able to see that annularity. You're going to be able to see that ring of fire. Everywhere else, it's going to be a partial eclipse. That's how these things work. So I found it kind of fitting that when James, the first word that James S., the first eclipse that came to mind when he was kind of tossing to me was the one next year. And that's perfectly natural. You're in Alabama, so that's going to be the good one. Well, it'll be the better one for anybody in Alabama. And I'm a little worried, and one of the reasons I wanted to come on today, and I've had this conversation with some folks out at KNBC in Los Angeles. It's easy to get kind of total eclipse fever, and we're looking forward to that April eclipse. But if you're anywhere in the Pacific time zone and pretty much across the Mountain time zone, you don't want to sleep on this October eclipse. It's going to be the better one. It's going to have a greater percentage of the sun covered. There's still going to be partial eclipses. So you still need to have your eye protection. If you haven't already gotten the eclipse glasses, you need to go ahead and do that now. It may be too late. I'm not sure. There's many other ways that you can see the eclipse through welder's glasses, and there's ways you can have little craft projects. One of my favorites is building one out of a cereal box, where you cover one side up with a tinfoil and just poke a little hole in there and make yourself a little camera obscura to shine that eclipse onto the bottom of the cereal box. NASA has some great resources on their eclipse website to show you how to do some of these things. But you really need to go ahead and get those eclipse glasses or whatever you're going to do to be able to see this wherever you are. But know that if you put this one off and you want to wait till the April one, and you are on the West Coast or in the Mountain time zone, you're going to miss the good one.
Hey, Tony, Troy here. I've got a friend from the Weather Service actually that's flying in to Austin for the October one. And we're going out to around San Angelo. But Tony, what's amazing to me, and I was warned about this, there are no hotel rooms to be found down here right now. There are no hotel rooms. I mean, everything is booked up. I think we grabbed one of the last Holiday Inn Express rooms in San Angelo, Texas, and that was a couple of months ago. But it's amazing. You go and look at the little smallest town in West Central Texas, and the Holiday Inn Express, they're all booked.
Yeah, I booked my my trip on my poor wife. She deals with so much with these things. 2017 eclipse. We're standing in Santee, South Carolina, and she's had about enough of eclipses at that point because it was a good 2-year run up to that with all the talks I gave and visits to science museums and such around here. Mid eclipse, she pokes me in the ribs and she goes, "Where are we going for 2024?" So we're going to Texas because I call enough of you folks friends to know that the climatology of that 2024 eclipse, again, starting out in Texas and running up through the Ohio Valley and then out Maine and out through the Canadian Maritimes, the climatology of it, the clouds are probably going to be less of a problem in Texas. And I tell you this because I booked my April 2024 room about 6 months ago. And the poor innkeeper that I bought a room from or reserved a room from outside of Dallas hadn't gotten the memo yet, whereas a lot of the other hotels around there had gotten the memo because I booked it for like $125, where some of the other rooms around there were they're already up $500-600. So I call that a win.
Well, what I'm worried about, Tony, is we've been in the drought for 400 years now here in Austin, and what I'm waiting for is the October, whatever date that is, flood, because naturally it'll happen about that time. I mean, it just will happen about that time. So,
well, I'll share with you what the quote unquote eclipse professionals will do when it comes to clouds and anything else weather related, because that's the one thing we can't control. My job is easy. Y'all's job's hard. If I tell you the sun is going to be at declination so and so and right angle so and so, it's going to be there. And it's going to be there within, hundredths of a degree. You can't tell me what the clouds are going to do that day, nor should you be able to, especially that far out. So what the pros do is they will book a room kind of in the middle of 3 locations. And they're going to get up that morning and they're going to look at the weather forecast. And they're going to make their go, no go decision on which one of those 3 they're going to go to. You've also got to take into account traffic. We saw that with the 2017 eclipse. You could go on to Google Earth and turn off all of the roads, and you could turn off all of the states, borders and cities and everything, and just let the Google traffic coloring, just let that show through. And you could watch the path of the eclipse go by as those roads turn red. What you're actually seeing was everybody left at once. People arrive over a couple different hours, but hey, once the show is over, there's no encore. Everybody gets in their car and tries to leave at once.
Yeah, we left Greenville, South Carolina, and it took us about 6 hours to get to Atlanta after the 2017 eclipse. And we were scared to death. You know, we had a beautiful day, but one lone cumulus cloud drifted right over the sun about 15 minutes before the eclipse, and I thought, if it stays right there, I'm just gonna lose it. But you're right, Tony. Back then, you could actually find a hotel reservation in advance of that eclipse, but the national change got smart this time, and they went in and blacked out those dates. So I'm lucky enough to have found a room in San Antonio for the total. And is it directly in the path of totality, Tony, or is it just a little off? I got to drive a little bit to get into the totality path.
Yeah, so San Antonio is directly in the path of totality. If you go a little bit southeast, so here's the trick. So you definitely need to be in that path of totality, but you try to aim for that center line. There's a northern boundary and there's a southern boundary. That center line, what that's going to give you is the greatest duration of that eclipse. You go too close to that, either one of those lines, and the eclipse is going to last seconds for you. You get closer to that center line, and it's going to be the full. Let me pull up for San Antonio what's going on there. That's the wrong one. San Antonio is actually going to see both of them. So the annular eclipse in San Antonio is about a little over 4 minutes long. But if I were to relocate to, and I'm just going to pick a town here, if I relocate to New Braunfels, and I'm probably butchering that name, that eclipse duration is under 2 minutes. And you can get down literally to seconds as you get closer. So you could probably be okay in San Antonio. The less you're driving the day of the eclipse and right around it, the better. But if you really got to maximize things, you want to go a little bit southeast to the center line.
So how long will we have to wait for the next total eclipse in the continental United States?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that question. I don't have that off the top of my head, but John mentioned all the GIS work that's going on in his neck of the woods. I have been spending the last 2 weeks writing a lot of GIS code, and one of the things I do outside of WeatherBrains is I have an email list, which I think pretty much everybody on this call is on. John, you're of course welcome to join if you like my brand of crazy. And any broadcast meteorologist, National Weather Service, enthusiasts. I have a lot of students on there. They're also welcome to join. I'm RTP Hokie, HOKIE @gmail.com. Just drop me an email. Everybody's going to get a several page report that will answer that question, but not just for the continental United States, because that's something that I've learned from you guys is, and I said it in my recorded comments there, that people's view of things ends at their horizon. So this report is going to include information about your area. Those eclipses that have passed right through, those are very, very rare. And those eclipses that are, we'll say, within about a day's drive, because that's important too.
Well, we thank you for teaching us a lot over the years, Tony, and we thank you for this sage advice tonight for everyone to watch it, view it safely, and be ready to see the next one whenever it comes.
We'll talk again April of 2024 leading up to then. That's going to be a nice big one. If you look at the path that one takes, that's going to be even bigger in terms of how many people are going to see it because of the major metropolitan areas that it moves through. It's going to be bigger than 2017.
By the way, my brand of crazy is the current working show title here. You can't beat that. So shifting gears slightly, I did have a question that came in via X.
Still can't get used to
that. They're asking, discuss the difference between a tropical and an extratropical cyclone. And typically we'll let Neil handle that. I mean, I don't know if anybody else wants to handle it. The way I would explain that, an extratropical cyclone is like a low on a map where the main energy source, it's the combination, the contrast of warm and cold air, where a tropical cyclone, it's the energy is the latent heat of condensation. It's warm core. And you obviously have to have warm water in the ocean for that. But we'll get Neil to do a dissertation on the difference between extratropical and tropical cyclones when he gets back. Kim, where is he? Is he circling an airport, or is he down? Do we know his status? He's traveling tonight.
Yeah, so he finally did land, but he's on the metro somewhere. No, he lives not too far from the airport. I'll maintain his security and not reveal where exactly that is to our entire listening audience. But it's possible he could jump on in a minute, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Now we know Kim that he was involved in the missing F-35 drama, and apparently he was in on that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what he's been doing? What he's been doing is surfing all of the craziness off of the coast of the Carolinas with all of these passing hurricanes. It's been wild out there, and it's really too bad that he's not with us this time to talk about that. But you know, he has this real penchant for trying to kill himself, and he did himself proud again. So let's remember that for next time.
Well, he has the whole floor next Monday night because he'll be doing I forget what the official title is now. I initially named it Fun with Models after Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory's Fun with Flags, but then I quickly was reminded that was probably not a good title, so we changed it to something a little more family friendly.
Yeah. So real quick, we'll just do a quick weather roundup here, and again, obviously for those of us in the East, it's good. John, you are in this continental air mass. How good does it feel in Peachtree City tonight? And I think John is muted.
There's our requisite muting.
Gotta have it. It's gotta have it. So I mentioned I was up in Raleigh, and I was same weekend last year, and it was miserable, and it was beautiful this weekend. And yeah, it came through a little bit of that rain, but I caught a little sun though. It was a little bit too blue skied. Yeah, I'll take this over 95 or 105, no doubt.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And Jen, what are you doing tonight? You say 40s up there?
47 tonight, yeah, and it's bone dry. We do warm up a little bit. We'll be in the low 80s later in the week, but no complaints here. No rain till Monday here.
Yeah, and in the meantime, we have Rick and Kim and James A. in the midst of another hail-orama. Kim, are you ready for this tomorrow?
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks. I had been so excited for just these happy little storms. Those little icons, man, are so misleading when they don't include the threat of monster hail alongside the little lightning bolt. Yeah, I'm so excited to let you guys know how my roof is doing next week, because odds are good that I will be a target on one of these days.
Getting stoned in Oklahoma.
Show title.
Oh, wow.
Show title. Wow, that's a great show title. So in Troy, you got your parka on tonight. You're down to 90, five, 6?
I'm sitting here looking, and we are at we're at 8:44 Central Time as we record this, down to 78 degrees when you think that 2 months ago we were still close to 100. And the good news is that we're within a week of when the sun is going to be south of the equator again. So, begin the fall months, and it's beginning to show up a little bit here, but probably mid and upper 90s here for the next week. No real rain seen at least till Saturday or Sunday, I don't think, for the Austin area, but we did get 1.5 inches of rain in the last week, and that's the first real measurable, decent rains that we've seen in the Austin area since June.
And we typically leave the tropical stuff to Neil, since he's our East Coast correspondent. But we have we're doing this on the 18th of September. We have one active tropical cyclone on the board, which is Nigel, a hurricane basically in the middle of nowhere, and thankfully stays in the middle of nowhere. But the season still has a ways to go here. And a new wave comes off the coast of Africa Wednesday, and we'll see what that does. But let's move on to picks of the week. This is where we go around the horn, and we'll all share something cool that's related to weather. John, we're going to stall and give you as much time as possible here. So let's go to Rick Smith. And I know that Rick's got a really good pick of the week for us.
Yes, I'm just trying to remember what it is. It's so good.
It's so good. It's so good. Yeah.
Mine couldn't handle it, just blacked. No, actually, it's a press release from FEMA and the FCC about a nationwide emergency alert test coming up October the 4th, just so no one is surprised by this. So yeah, that's my pick. It's kind of a dry government press release, but important information.
Okay, good deal. All right, let's go up to Jen for your pick of the week. Jen.
Yeah, mine is highly connected to the show tonight because it's entitled Distillery Spill Floods Streets of Portuguese Town with Wine. And this is extremely important because it was 600,000 gallons of wine flowing down the street. And there was one cellar that was flooded. And then the chief executive, he said in the article here, there may be a lingering smell, but it was such good quality wine. It won't be that big of a deal. It won't smell awful because it was such a good quality wine. And I think probably the most tragic thing here is that local firefighters took a lot of the wine to a wastewater treatment plant, and I am upset about that because I would have solely been there for the cleanup effort on this one.
All right, good deal. And again, all the links will be up on weatherbrains.com. James Adelot, give us a good pick of the week.
We dropped to 59 degrees in Tulsa this morning, and that's the first time we've been below 60 since May 26th, which is the second longest streak on record. Easy guess as to what the existing standing record is 116 days, so we got really close to it. But does anybody want to guess the year that happened? It's easy. 1980.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to guess.
Nasty heat.
Yeah.
Nasty. All right, good deal. So let's go to Troy. Troy, give us a good pick.
Foghorn.
Oh, yes.
I'm glad I had a pick.
Wow.
Get to hear the foghorn.
Love it. All right, Kim, give us a pick.
My pick of the week is an article from the Norman Transcript talking about the potential for our weather museum to be undergoing a big expansion. It could be a really neat facility. And it just looked super cool. My fingers are crossed. All that we need is a small, early investment by the city, and that will require the, voters to support some big package of some kind. And there's, we're Oklahoma, so we don't really like that at first, but maybe as people warm up to the idea, then we can get the museum. But it's just so cool. So check it out.
That's how you got Bricktown, was the MAPS initiative. We voted it down in Birmingham, but it got voted in Oklahoma City.
Oh, that's interesting. And man, what that has done for Oklahoma City can't be understated.
Yeah, just find an extra $110 million to go with that seed money, Kim. You'll have a weather museum.
So Kim, introduce your guest for those that are watching.
Yeah, my guest, this is Lily, and I've been informed, is refusing to go to bed, and she just brought in a unicorn that has an additional. So there's this unicorn that has an additional unicorn attachment, and I don't know why, but that's how we're rolling over here.
This is great.
Lily loves Monday nights.
I love it. Hey, my pick of the week, it's a tweet from Josh Morganman, who people know as iCyclone, and he, like me, we're agitated at the unbelievable amount of disinformation on Hurricane Lee. Constant fear porn over and over and over and over. And it's not only from the nitwits on TikTok and YouTube, it's from some of the national media outlets.
Absolutely.
I mean, you had respectable names in their headlines saying New York City braces for Category 5 Hurricane Lee. Hurricane Lee headed for New Jersey. The latest on Action News tonight at 10. I have never, ever, and I've been doing this a long time, and I am an astute observer of social media trends. It's unbelievable. And I guess I understand why some people do it. They do it to try and generate ratings. Some people do it because of a political worldview. Some people do it because they make piles of money off the creator content funds, using fear to scare people, to suck in these rubes that subscribe and watch their products and services. But what I don't understand is, why do people listen to this stuff? Why? And when they're dead wrong, they still have the same number of followers. It's almost like this religious type thing where they can do no wrong. And I've never seen anything like it. It's unbelievable. And, there's nothing we can do about it. All we can do is stay calm. Hopefully I feel like, this lone voice crying in the wilderness sometimes, in this ocean of insanity, of hyperbole, of nonsense, of idiocy. And I get cranky talking about it, but and people say, well, what's it to you? Well, number one, nobody should be using fear porn to generate engagement numbers and followers to create money for them to pad their pockets. That's nuts. That's wrong. And then I get, over a series of 2 weeks, probably 200 messages from people. Hey, I saw on TikTok that, that Baltimore is going to be wiped out and the airport's going to be closed for 2 weeks and they're going to have no water for 3 weeks. And I got to, I'm supposed to go to, see my parents that are aging. And do I need to cancel the trip? And I have to answer these questions at this time I don't have, dealing with information from nitwits that people think it's actually true. And it's unbelievable. So anyway, I don't mean to be preachy here, but I'm cranky. So having said that, Tony, let's go to you and we'll get uncranky.
Well, we can get a little cranky about the sun. Mine's has to do with space weather. And there's a new article that's come out in the journal Science about solar activity. So the sun has a cycle. It's an 11-year cycle where the number of sunspots ebbs and flows. And that's a good metric for what the sun is out there doing. Those sunspots are where things like the current geomagnetic storm that we're experiencing right now. We're at a G1 geomagnetic storm, and it's going to rise to a G2 tonight, which could produce some auroral activity up in the northern part of the country. But the interesting thing about the solar activity and what this article is talking about is we kind of blew the forecast there in terms of what the peak would be this time. It's peaking earlier and it's peaking greater. And it's actually teaching us a lot about, we may not know as much as we thought we knew about that solar cycle. It may be shorter, and the way that it ebbs and flows might be a little bit different than we've expected. We've got a lot of data on it. It goes back a century or more, but of course we've got more spacecraft out there that are bringing in more data. So it's a fascinating article in the journal Science.
Awesome. And Tony, introduce your friend while we're
So this
here.
Is Howard. He made an appearance earlier. He had to come in and make his appearance as well. He's a good boy. He's a Dachshund Beagle mix and hangs out in my office all day long.
Looks like he's staring at Jen's cat.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
All right. Fight here.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right, John, we have stalled enough time. Give us a pick. Give us something fun. Go.
Yeah. I didn't want to be too wonky. I wish I would have heard about it. I could have had something really witty or something like that. But I mentioned I was in Alabama for the last 2 weeks, chasing time zones. And 2 weeks ago was for the Alabama Water Resources Conference. That's down in Orange Beach, Alabama every year. And it's a great conference. It's one of the better water resources conferences in the Southeast. And we don't get to go to it that often because we usually are dealing with a tropical storm of some kind in the Southeast somewhere. And so the years that we don't have that and we have a budget for it, I'd love to get down there, see old friends. It's a great cross section of water related topics. A lot of support academically from Auburn and Huntsville and South Alabama and University of Alabama. They're all in attendance with students there, and it was another great time. So a shout out for that. If you ever want more water to go to the beach.
There you go. Water, beach. I like it a lot. All right, Bill Murray, go.
Yeah, James, last week, of course, was NWA. We had a lot of fun last Monday night. thanks to Kim and Rick and James A for making it a really fabulous show. The whole time we thought that the folks in the restaurant were giving it that Jamie was giving us time cues for Ken because he had to go. They were trying to tell us the restaurant was closed and we needed to close our tab and get the heck out. But anyway, we had a blast. It was a lot of fun. I met during the conference Frank Wall, who's at KAKE in Wichita. And I'm telling you guys, they have done a feature film quality short. It's about 10 minutes long. Go to dawnofdoppler.com. And this film is about the El Dorado, James A., I may be messing it up, tornado, which was the first to be studied by a continuous wave Doppler. And Frank was talking about it to me there. We're going to have him on the show coming up here on October 9th. But in the meantime, go watch this because it has fabulous archival footage. And it's just a spectacular story. Next week, we do have What's Up with Models, Not Fun with Models, the original show title, with Dr. Neil Jacobs. We'll talk in 2 weeks to Dr. Beth Hall and Sam Lashley about setting up a mesonet. Earlier, John talked about the important role they play in their data assimilation, and then we'll have Frank on the night. James, that's just some of the shows coming up on WeatherBrains.
All right, good deal. Did you do your pick?
That was it.
That was it. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
okay, I've got you.
Good, good pick.
Multi-tab. We got Monday Night Football. I'm trying to see where we are with this. We've not had Monday Night Football on ABC in a while, but it's back. But I think we're going to be on a little late tonight, which is fine. Hey, John, real quick before we go, anything else you need to plug? Any websites or social media accounts? Anything you want to plug? Go.
Not really. Our office's website, weather.gov/SERFC for all of your water and rainfall information for the Southeast U.S. And then keep your eyes open for that flood inundation mapping services that will be rolling out over the next many years.
Excellent. That'll be very helpful for all. So thanks a lot for taking your time to be with us. It's been a great discussion. Hit the wrong button. You guys ever hit the wrong button? Hit the email. Email. I'm not supposed to do that. All right. Here's the deal. If you're new, WeatherBrains is typically on the air every Monday night, live at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. If you want to watch it live, you're welcome to do that on the WeatherBrains YouTube channel, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. But we know that most of you listen, and we're thankful for that. If you would like to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Good
thanks,
show.
Tony. Thanks, John, for staying up late with us.
Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Lily.
My pleasure. Thank y'all.